Good morning. At Premier Alternate Site Programs, much like with your own organizations, we live and die by our leadership success and failures. So it's with special excitement that I'm pleased to welcome Aaron Tucker. Aaron is a retired Navy SEAL, turned behavioral scientist and global process consultant. His expertise in organizational development has streamlined international supply routes, reorganized manufacturing plants across Europe, and designed the customer and employee satisfaction metrics of leading Fortune 500 companies and airlines. With experience both on and off the battlefield in 7 different countries, he uses his own success and failures to teach the true meaning of leadership, high-performing teams, and grit. Please welcome Aaron Tucker.
All right, well, welcome. So how's everybody doing this morning? I know it's probably somewhat of a late night for a few. It is what it is. Day 2 of a conference is always like that. So, with that, I'd like to start out these type of early morning sessions slightly different. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to have a little question. It'll be very simple. All you have to do is raise your hand, and we'll go from there. So does anybody know what this is? The Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, right? So it was the largest building until 2004. So what you're looking at is about an 88-story building, and at about 60 floors up, you have this catwalk that goes across. And as you can tell by looking at the picture, you can potentially see right through the bottom of that, right? So the first question I want to ask is, anybody in here afraid of heights? So all of you are going to love this next part. So who in here, show of hands, would be happy just to walk across that catwalk back and forth without any issues? Who would not? Keep your hands up for a second. What if I was to offer you $1,000? If you would do it, put your hand down. 5,000. 20,000. $1 million. Okay. Now for those that wouldn't do it for $20,000, let me ask you this. What if you had a significant other, a kid, a wife on the other side, that was afraid to cross? Would you take them across to get them back? Right? So why am I asking this question? Well, you see, as a Navy SEAL, and as someone that teaches a little bit of grit and mental growth, this is a key question or key response we typically get, but the end state is, this is also a key portion of becoming a high-performing team. And I'll tell you why. Because ultimately, when we think of teams, we want to get the whole team across. We want to engage them, we want to motivate them, and we're going to talk about this specific case all throughout the next 45 minutes. And the end is, I want to demonstrate to you that not only could I get you there and back without having to pay you, and it relates to your business because ultimately you want the alignment across the organization. You want the people that work for you, both vertically and horizontally within the hierarchy, to execute on the priorities that you give them, but do it without having to do the carrot and the stick. So before we go any further, as Mark has already said, and thank you for the introduction, my name is Aaron Tucker. So Navy SEAL, combat operations, about 7 countries. This includes the majority of Central America, doing counter-narcotics work. Obviously the Middle East, doing counter-terror, standing up foreign units, and a bunch of other work. Bosnia, I had the honor of going after Milosevic and the war criminals in the early 2000s, and then a few other countries in Africa for various other operations. So beyond that, I got out, Big 4 global firm, got my MBA, went to Deloitte for a while, loved it, left Deloitte because of my PhD and moving into the behavioral science field. We'll get to that too a little bit, because I had the pleasure, distinct honor of working with a renowned clinical behavioral psychologist that is what some have called almost the forefather of employee engagement today. His research has been used at places like Google, Facebook, a plethora of even some of pharmaceutical hospitals to rewrite their own basically doctor-to-patient surveys. So beyond that, once I got through all of that, I was a sponsored athlete for a while doing multiple day expedition style adventure racing, which really just means I went really slow for a couple days. So tons of biking, land nav, got to parachute one of them, which was fun for me, but really something you don't expect to do. And then finally, 2012 time frame, I got to climb Kilimanjaro as I was running a program in Africa to save the elephants. So that is basically a brief history of me, but it's enough about me, even though honestly it's probably the favorite part of my presentation is to talk about myself. So, what is a high-performing team? Now, a lot of times we automatically assume, we think of, oh, okay, the Navy SEALs, we have fighter pilots. But let's go beyond that. In corporate America, do we not have high-performing teams? Or do we just not have that well-defined definition of what we expect a high-performing team to be? So, what exactly is a high-performing team? Now, ultimately, for everybody in this room, we're probably very much focused on what? The P&L. We're looking at how much money, what's our revenue, what's our top and bottom line. Would a high-performing team not give you those results? So most likely you already have some semblance of a high-performing team. The question is, going from there is, for those that don't, or even those that do, is how do we build them? How do we make them better? And what do we have to put in place to ensure that we have it? But for me, when I think of a high-performing team, I think of collaboration. I think of communication. I think of having diversity of thought and inclusion within the group, within the team, so everybody's voice is heard, and providing that feedback loop to ensure that we're constantly improving through lessons learned. Now, in the SEAL teams, we have a very specific way of creating a high-performing team. So for those that have seen the documentaries or seen the videos or anything else or read one of the numerous books out there, we know that in the SEAL community, we begin to develop that team on week 3 of SEAL training, what we call BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition School. So week 3 is also known as Hell Week. Basically, you go into what we call isolation, which really means that we're going to go into a classroom Sunday morning, and that's just to make sure that everybody actually shows up. At about 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, we go out to the beach in these basically Army-style makeshift tents, and we are supposed to go to sleep to get a little bit of rest. Obviously, that doesn't happen because of anxiety, because of eagerness to kind of get this process started. And at about 10, 11 o'clock, we have what we call breakout, where they'll throw sim rounds, basically smoke, flashbang into the tents, shooting a heavy machine gun, obviously with blanks. The goal is to cause pure chaos. Because openly, this is the big differentiator on a high-performing team, is the ability to perform in chaos. And we're going to talk exactly how we create that within an organization as well. But now throughout this, you'll basically run, in the 5-day period, probably 150 to 200 miles. You'll swim probably close to 10. You'll row our little boats for probably another 30 to 40. You'll conduct sessions of log PT, obstacle courses, and a whole bunch of other really fun things. At one point, I remember doing a belly flop from the 10-meter platform. Worth it. I got 5 minutes in the gym where it was warm, or in the locker room at the pool. But I did it because my team. I did it so the team itself could be warm with me. It's one of those little sacrifices that you have to do, and honestly, it was day 3, I hadn't slept at all, so I probably wasn't really mentally there to get from the get-go anyway. But to give you a quick story of what an example in my life of what a high-performing team is, in 2004, we were in Afghanistan. So going back in time, historically, 2004, IEDs weren't an issue. Afghanistan wasn't as big as it is, 10 years after that. Meaning, there wasn't a whole lot of military there. So we flew into Bagram Air Base, basically got into our Humvees, and we were tasked with one very specific operation. And that was to, at the time, capture kill an individual named Rosie Khan, who was the number 4 Taliban leader at the time. So I bring this up because we, as an organization, had not worked joint, had not worked with the Army, had very little interaction with other international special operations units, let alone other international conventional forces like the big Army. So we went from area to area to area, continuously learning how to integrate, create the communication, and we began to realize that the support that we get from them was amazing. We began to understand that their capabilities, and how when it integrated with our capabilities, we were able to actually get the job done a lot faster. Now this took 90 days, 128 direct combat operations, direct missions, to finally get it. And when it happened, it wasn't just us. We were a team of 20 individuals, or a team of 20 people. It took 7 nations, from the Lithuanians, the Polish, all the way down to the Norwegians, and a few other European special operations, as well as conventional forces running the operation to support the air, the F-15s, the F-18s, at night the C-130 gunships. So all of this had to take place in order to truly get to where we were, to get that end state. And openly, we ended up conducting the capture kill operation basically that August time frame. But it wasn't just us, it was the team as a whole, and that's what it takes to truly accomplish, even in your world. It's never an individual effort, it's always going to be the group. So, one of the biggest things that we talk about as a team, and we talked about it a little bit with Petronas Towers, is motivation, right? It's a big hot topic now. You look at the Gallup. Gallup is basically telling you that it's something like 43% are disengaged in the workforce. Why is that? But even more telling, if you go back an additional 17 years worth of Gallup's data, you'll find that we actually haven't changed the disengagement historically. There really hasn't been a change in the workforce in terms of engagement and motivation. So you have to ask yourself specifically, why is that? Well, as I said, I worked for that behavioral science firm, and I worked for an individual named Ed Deasy. I had the pleasure of doing research as well as implementation into Fortune-type companies. And what we learned, or what he learned back in 1956, getting his doctoral work at Cornell University, was he created a study that said, I'm going to pay someone more and I'll get a higher level of effort, a higher level of quality. Do you think that happened? It didn't. Surprised the heck out of him back then. And what he realized was that we need to look deeper into motivation, or what I truly call engagement. And what he found after running multiple studies is that motivation truly is not what we think it is. Take this individual in the picture, right, running from this dinosaur. You think they're probably highly engaged, highly motivated to save their life for survival, right? So what happens after the chase? After that individual is fine, you think they're still motivated? You think they're still engaged to accomplish that same task? No. So what we found is that what we don't truly want is just motivation. Because ultimately, we've all heard motivational speakers, and what happens, you get excited, you get pumped during the talk. The next day, a little bit less. The next day, a little bit less. So the question is, what do we truly want? We want sustained engagement. We want to know how we're going to engage our employees for the long term. How do we get them bought in, which we call volition, around the specific tasks that we're doing? So what we did learn from this research was that we actually have basic psychological needs. So we know we have a need for water, we know we have needs for food. Those are the standard basic needs of life. But what we also now know is that we have very specific needs psychologically to stay engaged in the workforce. So I'll start at the bottom. We have competence. So competence is really about growth. Think of it as learning. And I'll pose the question. Those that graduate college, you get a new certification. Are you not extremely excited, extremely engaged because you just learned something? You just accomplished a new task that you didn't think was possible before. Maybe if you're a runner, you just ran a marathon. That's growth. And that is a key driver, something that you need in order to grow in life, in order to be engaged with the task that you're doing. You continuously have to get better. Well, the next is relatedness. And it comes down to caring, but I don't want to take this from the standard, I care about you. It's an emotional sense. It's not. Who's here heard of servant leadership? It's a pretty big topic right now. Is it new? You go back to 1950s, the Marine Corps Officers Leadership Guide, you'll find a whole entire chapter laid out to servant leadership. It is not a new topic, but that is relatedness. It's about caring about your employees, taking care of them, standing up for them, and putting yourself behind them. Simon Sinek says, leaders eat last, right? Again, that came from a very military type style that he had the pleasure of basically flying overseas and spending some time with the military overseas to begin to understand and learn these different characters, these different traits of what makes a key leader. Well, that's all relatedness is. It's ensuring that you're taking care of your people. And finally, autonomy. Now, typically, you ask 100 different people what autonomy is, the number one response comes down to freedom. And I pose the question, do you truly have freedom in your job? Probably not. And the people that work for you, your directs don't either. Think of it this way. I'm a business consultant, so I go into a company maybe to redesign a new process, whether it's engagement or realigning the organizational development of manufacturing or strategy. I can't go in and be like, yeah, this is what we're gonna do, but you know what, I don't feel like it. I think I'm just gonna go over here. Hey HR, how you doing? Finance, can I look at your P&L? How about you let me reconcile it? Would not go well for your business, so I'll just tell you that right now. So we don't truly have freedom in our life, but we do have autonomy. Autonomy isn't about freedom of decision. It's about providing someone with a lane. Here's your left and your right flank. Here's the things that you need to stay in. This is as far as you can go one way and as far as the other. But I'm just going to give you that North Star. This is where we start talking about decentralized organizations. Now in the military, especially in the SEAL teams, my task unit, which was made up of about 40 individuals, at one deployment we were in 6 different locations. My team of SEAL Team 2 in 2005 was in Colombia, 4 places in Iraq, 3 places in Africa, and 2 different sites in Afghanistan. That's decentralized as about you can get. So how do we get that? We provide them with that strategy, right? We call it the commander's intent. So if you go back to the Gulf War, Bush's commander's intent was to take down Iraq 24 hours without losing a single life and minimal collateral damage. We can all understand exactly what that means, especially from the military side. So I know, as a leader on my team, I know what I have to operate to. I know what I have to execute to. And I know what the end state is supposed to look like. But I don't have time, especially in a combat situation, in the middle of a firefight, to ask permission. I have to execute. Is it not the same in your own world, in your own organizations? Do you not have chaos? Do you not have ambiguity? So how many have seen in their careers, in their lives, where no decision is made because you can't get the answer because you won't make it, because you don't think you have the authority or the autonomy to do so? Well, I'll tell you right now, no decision, no action is action. And 99% of the time, it's the wrong one. The constant state rarely works out. But if you provide that autonomy, attached very specifically to priorities, whether it's the strategy, year goals, specific things on your lines on your P&L, you now know that if you're not there as the leader, that individual will then have the authority and say, okay, this is what we have to do because I'm already aligned with my boss. So I'm going to make this decision. Now there's more to it than that because obviously there's repercussions to all of our actions. So you have to make sure that you develop that relationship with that employee that allows them to make that authority, to have that authority to make that decision where they don't fear the repercussion. So beyond these, what's called self-determination theory, it comes into a little bit more play. We've all heard of Maslow, right? The hierarchy of needs. It's good, but I'll tell you it's also slightly incorrect. You know, Maslow has the framework of, I have to have this before I can have this. Well, I'm here to tell you that you can be motivated by 5 different things at the exact same time. And if you can learn how to use those and understand your employees and what their motivation is, and motivation can be negative. I remember a time years ago, we were deployed to Central America. We were running counter-narcotics operations, and I had an individual that worked for me. His performance was always stellar. But all of a sudden, he started having issues on the job. Now, we also lived in 3 houses, 5 guys to a house, so we were very, very close quarters. So when his behavior started to change, we started asking questions like, why? What is going on with him? Why is his performance now decreasing? So we had that conversation. And it turns out that he had some family issues going on with his wife and his kid. Well, if we had not known that, we probably would have punished him. So by understanding the different motivations, different levers in an individual's life, both positive and negative, you're able to deal with them better. And I will guarantee you, for those that have felt or had a similar situation, the second that you deal with that employee in a positive way, they become the champion of the organization, they become your champion. They become bought into you as a leader and more bought into the organization. Now, going beyond the self-determination theory, going back into looking at what we did as the SEAL teams, what the fighter pilots do, the Blue Angels, the less as good Air Force Thunderbirds. What we've learned is it's actually a little bit deeper than that, the implementation side. Because honestly, self-determination theory is great, but it's research. And research is done in a vacuum. And I can guarantee you from my own doctoral work, I can't replicate a lot of things that I've read. So as I started looking at it for practical application, I realized that you have to have communication across the organization, across silos. Again, vertically and horizontally in the organization. You've got to have a culture of learning. And most importantly, you have to have trust. These are the three very specific things that we can do every day, we can build every day, that allow us, and our organizations and our people to be bought into what we're doing and become higher performers. And a high-performance individual coming together aligned to a single priority is where you become a high-performing team. So the first thing we'll talk about is communication. We've all played the telephone game, correct? And it always turns out so well at the end. I remember being in kindergarten, and I couldn't tell you what the word was, but by the time we got to the class of 20, 30 students, I don't think there was even the same letter in the word that came out. Does that not affect you today? When you tell someone something, and even in email, because email can be read from a very emotional point, it's misunderstood. So I want to give you the one very specific trick that we do in the military that has truly allowed me to overcome the game of telephone within work and my wife. Beautiful woman. We call the military brief back. So when I would get a standing order from my boss, for instance, if we're sitting in Afghanistan, and I had very specific roles throughout my military career. I ran intelligence, whether it was human sources or technical operations, installing bugs, wires, things like that, surreptitious entry. And I ran comms and fires, which meant I was the guy on the ground talking to the aircraft to drop ordnance or bombs on specific targets. So when I would get an order of, hey, we need you to make the request for assets for tomorrow night's operation, my kickback was, okay, Tony, just so I'm clear, you want fixed wing and rotary wing, do we need pickup, do we need this? Yeah, I get all of that. Okay, great, I now don't have to execute, I know I have to deliver. Because I asked the question, because I didn't have a full understanding of what the expectations were. If I take this to the manufacturing side, I recall plenty of times as a consultant to where the company said, this is what we want you to do, and then I would deliver on it. Oh yeah, that's not right. But this is what you said, but it's not what I meant. So you have to start asking that question, start replying, because you have to have that common language. You want to have that common understanding of what you have to deliver, or else you may not deliver it the way that they actually want it. And we've all seen it. Now the next part, as we talk about communication, is going to be around alignment. I know we all love pyramid schemes, so here's another one for you. Comes right out of B school, right? So, all I really want you to take away from here is, how do we communicate? We have a strategy. That strategy gets brought down. My rule of it was my commander's intent. When I consult, I usually put it off as a leader's intent. But what is the organization trying to accomplish? And how many organizations have like 10 things? Let me ask you, how many priorities can you have if you have 10? Not a single one. Because you cannot focus on 10 things. In the military, we focused on, we're not that bright, so as little as possible. But 3 to 5 things, right? So I have 3 to 5 things at my strategic goal. And when I talk about strategy, I'm talking 3 to 5 years, I'm not talking 1 year. And that is a whole long conversation that we can have, but you look at GE, even during Walsh's time, you go back to Jack Welch a while back, they had a 20-year strategy. And you can't tell me that GE wasn't innovative under Welch. So how could they have a 20-year strategy? One, it was ambiguous. They knew the specific division in the market industry they wanted to be in. So they knew that 20 years, we want to drive this turbine, and we want to be considered, basically a leader in the industry of top 3. And you know you're going to base that on sales and contract value. And then every year they looked at how do we start to accomplish that. And these are the things that I typically focus on with organizations and within the military, because ultimately we want to win the war on global terror. Great, I'm only here for 9 months. Pretty sure that's not going to happen during my stay. So I have to break that down. What can we begin to accomplish? Let's focus on that. Pick 3, pick 5, because ultimately those are things that you can actually focus on. Wharton did a big thing that had to do with what they call switching costs. So if you put 2 people up on a board and one writes, A through Z, 1 through 26, and the other individual goes A, 1, 2, B, 3, C, who do you think wins? The individual who is focused on one task at a time. Because they're able to prioritize, they're able to focus on it, put all their concentration. And again, Wharton has this massive study, and the loss of time, the loss of capability is right around 10 to 12% for one task. When you just go to 2 to 3, it becomes almost embarrassing. So ultimately, if your employees don't know the strategy or the priorities of yours, what are they focusing on? They're just throwing spaghetti at a wall, so to speak. Trying to figure out, well, this is what I have to do, so this is what I'm going to go after, even though it's not what you want. So communication is key. You need to communicate your goals, your alignment to them, your priorities. And as you go down a level, it becomes much more specific. So for those in sales, right, what do we look at in sales? When you get to that tactical, that granular leverage, what lead generation, if you're looking at marketing, it's impressions. So I know at that level we need this to get to this. So I want you as the marketing manager, I want you to focus on getting those impressions on the website. I want you to start turning them over, within the SQL, MQL phase of the pipeline. For sales, I want you to get it past that. In fact, I want you to have X amount by the end of the quarter. The problem is we don't typically go that deep. It's just we want more sales, and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. So the next thing is learning. So what we have here is a little exercise that we do week 2 of SEAL training, week 1 or 2. We call it drown proofing. So we get to hang out in the water with our feet tied, arms tied behind our back in about 12 feet of water. You have to bob for 5 minutes. Then you gotta kind of swim like a dolphin for a little bit. Bob for 5 minutes. Flip forward, flip back, go down and grab your mask, and then bob until they basically pull you out, because obviously you can't physically get out of the pool at that point. Do you think they just throw us in the water on day 1, all tied up? Of course not. Learning has to take place in the organization. Learning has to take place in terms of taking in historical data, developing lessons learned. So January 28, 1986. Does anybody remember what the major incident that day was? Challenger. Challenger was outside of having what we call psychological safety, was a massive, massive failure. Does anybody know that the information was known that that gasket was going to blow 99% of the time above a certain air temperature? It was. In fact, the individual that actually spoke up, an engineer, was basically told just to be quiet and stand down. What we got out of the Challenger incident, as tragic as it was a massive learning opportunity, a massive lessons learned database. Now in the military, I can go back 10 years. I can go into the SOCOM, Special Operations Command database, and I can pull 10 years worth of historical data. And what that means is next time I go to Afghanistan, or any other country that we've operated in, I can pull every single after-action report from not just my unit, but other units in the area. I know what the ground looks like prior to deploying. I'm at an 80% level before I even begin executing my first operation. You have to have a culture of learning in your organization. This means mentorship, coaching. We've all heard of the All Blacks, right? They had a horrible organization in the early 90s. And because they brought in mentoring in a very specific way, which they would literally tell you is the reason that they became as efficient at winning as they did. And when we talk about mentoring, we talk about learning, it comes down to having mental models. Mental models are key within an organization in order to transfer that lessons, transfer that learning across. How many people, there are people early on in their own career would just go get certifications? Because it was important, it was critical to the organization, it still is today. How many people that never use that certification again? So this is that differentiator for learning as well. It's not about just sending people to school or training. It's about sending them to actually being intentional about what we're doing, giving them the knowledge, the education, the experience that'll actually be usable for them on the job. We go back to the 3 bubbles. We talked about growth, right? Relatedness. It's all about learning. We need to learn. We need to become better at the things we do because we start to enjoy it more. Now, we talked about learning. I bring up a little bit of the millennials because it's always a hot topic. In fact, I already had the conversation outside. So some of my research, we dove into what we call generational gaps. So one of the key things that we found was what we call the Copernicus turn, right? Years ago, it was just called the Copernicus revolution. So Copernicus discovered that we were a heliocentric system. We revolve around the sun. And I know someone here is like, I have no idea where you're going with this. And that's okay too. But I want you to take this into technology. Right? So go back to, when I was young, mid-80s, there was a thing called TGIF, right? Thank goodness it's Friday, ABC. I used to love this show called Perfect Strangers with Balky. But in order to watch that show, where did I have to be? I had to be in front of the TV on Channel 12 at 8:30 at night on Friday. What can I do now if I want to watch it? Anything I want. I can YouTube. Probably buy it on Amazon. Netflix may not stream it, but if they did, I can watch it there too. The point is, technology has disrupted us to the point to where we have everything at our fingertips. And so when I take this back to the millennial understanding, it looks like this. Millennials grew up with technology here, right? It now surrounds them. We have a technology, we're very individual-centric with technology, basically all around us at our fingertips every single day. This is the part that a lot of us have difficulty understanding, is it's not that millennials are the now generation. They are, because they have it now. That's the way it is. We need to adapt to that. But the difference is, most millennials, what you'll find, they don't want you to hold their hand. They want the alignment. They want you to communicate what has to get done, when it has to get done, and they want you to back out of the way and only coach them on what has to be coached. And I'll tell you that there really is not a difference between millennials, Gen X, baby boomers, and the silent generation. And to prove it, I was sitting at lunch about 6 months ago with basically a private equity executive. And we were kind of talking about this very similar topic. And he starts laughing at me. And he goes, let me tell you a story. When he was 24 years old, out of his MBA, working at Goldman Sachs as an analyst, he had to give his first presentation out of 90 days on the job to a bunch of VPs and presidents. And about 30 seconds into his presentation, one of the presidents looks at him and says, Tom, stop. Looks around and says, if this is the future, we're screwed. Sound familiar? I know I've heard it as a Gen X. I know millennials hear it all the time. This is where I look at individuals like Simon Sinek, who basically put it on the parents and put it on them, saying they just weren't motivated, they weren't engaged. They are. Their motivations are the same. We, as leaders, are not fulfilling them. So I ask you this, whose fault is it when millennials aren't engaged? It's ours. So we need to begin to understand, one, the technology. We understand that it revolves around them. They have it at their fingertips every day. And we need to understand how to utilize that better. We need to understand the training needs that they have and how they learn. Because ultimately, if I want to go take a course on data mining, I can go on Coursera tomorrow and probably find it and use it. But if I wanted to do that 20 years ago, I'd probably have to find a school based in mathematics. Oh, it wasn't data mining back then like it is now, but the point is, understanding that transition that we've had, that transformation that's taken place will allow us to better actually teach them so they can learn. Because ultimately, they are the future. In fact, in the next couple of years, they will be the majority of management in corporate America in the US. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about is trust. So we all agree that trust is key to leading people. If you trust your boss, you trust your employees, more will get done. Now in the SEAL teams, again, I had a very specific role. I knew exactly what I had to deliver on a daily basis. My leadership never questioned my capability because I continuously delivered. Hey, we need to get the radios up. We need to make sure the air assets, our resources are there. We need X, Y, and Z. Go get it done. And I did. Because when I was aligned to what we were doing, but I also trusted my leadership, and they trusted me, which means I didn't have to be micromanaged. So what we find from this is trust. But trust, how do we build it, right? It doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable. It doesn't mean we don't check on things to make sure things are aligned to what we want. It just means I provide direction, and I step back, and I allow that individual within the lanes that I have given them to accomplish their goal. When I was restructuring manufacturing plants in Europe, I was a team of 12. I had a partner that I worked for, and then I had consultants under me. I never had calls every hour with them. It was a morning call and a day call. And my expectation was they will escalate issues to me, and I'll deal with the executive suite within the organization. Because that's trust. The final thing that you see in red, psychological safety, is one of the newest indicators that we have out there. It's been around for a while. But psychological safety is trust at its finest. It comes down to me and you being aligned, but also you having a voice and me listening to it. It doesn't mean that I'm going to have to do what you say, but I'm going to hear it out, because ultimately I believe in diversity of thought. I know that you didn't grow up the way I did. I know that you don't have the same experiences I do. But I guarantee you the newest individual on your team, the newest hire out of college or even high school, probably has some ideas that you didn't think about. And if we start listening to it, you'll find that you'll have a lot better performance, as well as a more driven team, because now, as a team member, my voice is heard, which means I'm more engaged in what we're doing because I'm now impacting it, even though my suggestion wasn't taken in. So we've all heard of Fukushima, right? Does anybody know there's a second nuclear plant? 10 kilometers away. And they were saved. All because of this. The leader of that plant had to lay 2 miles of cable, which typically is a 6 to 9 month project. Almost an impossible feat. Not only that, 12 hours in, they had to change the reactors that were going critical. And they did it with 20 minutes to spare and saved the other plant. And it was all because the leadership within that specific plant said, hey, I can't do this myself. He used a whiteboard, put up his priorities, and then just ran around checking to make sure, removing blockages, removing errors, and ensuring that his people were moving in the right direction, still staying aligned to ultimately saving the nuclear plant, which they did. And I don't think that case is looked at hard enough as we look at Fukushima. So how do we bring this all together, right? Well, ultimately, we have to begin to have a process, a mental model, if you will, that drives this across the organization, across our team. And so what a few of us have done is we took basically the mental model that we have in the military, created by Top Gun pilots, that SOCOM then took on, and we rewrote it for corporate America. And I will tell you this right off the bat. It's super simple. Again, we're not that smart. Keep things as easy as possible. But simplicity will be complexity every day of the week. And I can have that argument all day long. But here's the thing. I've done this year alone, 150 plans, quarterly projects, initiatives, if you will. The average project, they say OTIF manufacturing, on time in full, right? On time, on budget, doesn't happen 80% of the time. I'm at a 94% success rate on quarterly projects. All because I put the individuals in place, I allow for open planning, and then I hold them accountable. But I trust them to get their job done. I don't have to migrate, I talk to them once a week. As a consultant, I talk to the leaders once a week to see where it is. It's twofold. One, I can then coach and help, but two, I can escalate issues to begin to open up the communication within the organization. So, I call it the D4, because again, we like to keep things simple. So define, develop, deliver, and debrief. So we'll break this down a little bit. So we talked about goal alignment. We talked about communication. But how many people have walked out of a meeting and been like, I got this. Jade and I, we are completely aligned. I know exactly what I have to deliver. And 6 weeks later, it's not what it was supposed to be. It happens because we're not aligned. We don't allow for ambiguity within our goals. So we define our goals, it has to be clear, right? Understood by all. Also in the specific language of your organization. It has to be quantifiable. Can you measure it? And sometimes we quantify things is we have to deliver a very specific product. Binary is still quantifiable. We did it or we didn't. It really is that simple. And then capable. Can we actually accomplish this? And it doesn't mean we don't plan for stretch goals, because I'll tell you right now, after my first couple of iterations with organizations, everything's a stretch. Because you're starting to unlock the high performance part of a team, which means they can accomplish so much more than they initially set out to do. And the one thing we don't have on here is, it has to be aligned to the strategic imperative, the strategy of the company. Because if we're not going after the strategy, making the impact on the strategy, what the heck are we doing? So we look at a goal, and we see this a lot within organizations, right? I want to increase revenue by 2021. It's a good goal. But if I throw $1 down on the table and you just increased your revenue, is that really what you mean? If you walk out of a planning session with an objective like this, and you ask 5 different people to give you the quantifiable number of what this means, what does increased revenue mean? You'll get 5 different answers. So we'll make it a little bit better, right? Increase revenue through strategic partnerships. I now know what we're focusing on, but I still haven't made it quantifiable. No one is would be aligned to it, but we don't all actually agree on what the end state is, what that win is supposed to look like, right? So 8 to 10% increase in EBITDA through the launch of GPO and continuum of care market. Does everybody understand what that means? I know exactly financially how much we want to deliver, how we're going to do it, and in which specific market. Now, what you don't see on here is obviously the time frame, because it has to be time bound. But this is what a goal is. No point in my military career if I heard, go out and wood one for the giver. Right? I couldn't even tell you what that even means. So when I go on an operation, it's very, very specific. It's our unit will conduct a specific mission set, and it could be training, it could be standing up a foreign unit. And we will do it under this location, under these specific metrics. And we're going to do it at this time. And what this tells us is that I know where I'm going, I know what I'm doing, I know how I'm doing it. So I know what success looks like, not just to me, but for my boss, for my boss's boss. And I also know that it's going to be tied directly to the strategy of what we're going after. And I'm going to tell you right now, when you give this to the younger generation, they begin to see their impact, their own personal impact on the organization. And that drives engagement, sustained engagement. This is what begins to keep people at work at night. What begins to keep people aligned. When you start making the positive impact on this objective, people will begin to stay, oh, I gotta get this report done. In 30 minutes, I'll just stay and knock it out. Because I know it's important. So the next part we talk about is to develop. So Eisenhower had this quote, where the plan is nothing, planning is everything. Why is that? Well, ultimately, every plan never goes as planned. It's almost like Murphy's Law and chaos theory had an offspring of Jason and Freddy combined, and that's injected into your plan on a daily basis. It never works. So, does that mean we don't plan? No. That means that the plan, it's not nothing, but it's going to have to be adaptable, flexible, and it's going to have to change. So when we develop our plans, our goal is to have alignment within the team. Endorsement, meaning you know what your job is, you've nodded your head, we agree on it within a common language, you know when it's due, and you're going to deliver on it. And finally, I give everybody autonomy. I don't have time to hold your hand because I probably have 15 other projects. I have a day job, as all of you do. But I expect you to deliver exactly what it is. Now, when we deliver these plans, we follow what we call an 80% rule. My plan, when it leaves, will be actionable potentially the following day. But it's only 80% complete. And we do this partially because I can do a whole plan for a quarter and 4 hours now. But the flip side is if I go to 100%, which means I'm planning to death, by the time you get out to begin to deliver that plan, it's probably already changed. So I take that in and I understand it. Now when I say 80%, it doesn't mean I'm just kind of throwing darts at a wall. It means that I'm not going to get the very granular level of what has to be done. I'm going to put up a deliverable. This is what has to be provided by a very specific date. So we develop these plans. We're very intentional. I give a who, a specific action or deliverable, and what the due date is. So when I say who, it's who is actually accountable to deliver this, whatever this action is. It's not 2 to 3 people. It's not a department. It's a specific individual. What is the action? What is the deliverable that has to be done? Maybe it's as simple as I have to get out 15 emails and approvals to have a meeting. I have to get this report. I have to reconcile the P&L. And finally, I have a due date. When is it specifically due? We do this because as we begin to execute, we have a 15-minute meeting once a week. All I have to do is say, hey, is it done? Is this done? Is this done? Great, moving on. And if it's not, it's no longer about why are you behind, it's what do I need to help you? What support do I need to give you in order to accomplish this? And the last part of our planning is contingencies. So, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. From a planning perspective, going into execution, right? We live in a boot camp environment. It's constantly changing. So we have to continuously change to have it. As I've said, who's ever had a perfect plan get executed perfectly? Not me, and I've had quite a few in my day. Constantly changing, but there is more of a philosopher from the past decade or so that probably had one of the best quotes I've ever heard in my life, and it's everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. They're not a philosopher, but we'll go with it. And finally, we deliver, right? Operational excellence. That's what we strive for every single day. This is that weekly meeting. It takes 15 minutes, schedule 30, typically have it done in 7. It's a brief. It's one-way communication. I am informing the team in a collaborative environment of what actually is going on. As the PM, as the leader, I've already done the homework. I already know the status of it all. I'm just letting the rest of the team see what's going on. Because ultimately, one individual, especially with business now being not even geo or temporal located, don't always talk. They don't know what's going on in one region to the next. So this is that time when we align everybody with where the process, where the project is, so we can deliver it. But also, one of the biggest things about a high-performing team, if you're falling behind and I've got the bandwidth, I'm gonna walk over and help you. Or, hey, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we just did that 3 weeks ago. I'll send you the document. This is where that learning comes in. We begin to really put that experiential learning over and over in an organization. And it can only be done with collaboration and team setting. So we develop an execution rhythm. Again, when do we meet? Same time every week. And we don't leave our planning session until that is actually locked in stone and the calendar invite goes out. Structured approach. I couldn't do it in 7 to 10 minutes if I didn't have solid structure. But what it does, it allows us to pivot effectively. Towards the end of that meeting, it's, hey, just so you know, I've been retasked and no longer on this project. Great, we'll get through the brief, we'll spend 5 minutes, we're gonna talk about what we have to do to get your replacements, get you trained up, and figure out how we're gonna divvy out that work, at least for the next few weeks, while we're pivoting around it. And finally, the biggest thing that hits us every single time, or maybe it's just me that I get 300 emails a day, is what we call task saturation. The behavioral science world calls it cognitive overload, the Army calls it a helmet fire. We're not that smart. But the point is, so task saturation, right, is I have a task or multiple tasks whether it's perceived or real, but I don't have the time or the tools, maybe not even the resources to accomplish all of it. And so many of you wear this as a badge of honor. And so I'm going to give you a little demonstration of what this looks like in your daily lives. So pardon my seeing my back. So, right, how many people have so much work to do they can't get it all done in a single day? How many people brag about it to their coworkers? Yeah, probably more than the two honest people that raised their hand. So here's you, right? Here is your tasks that you have on a daily basis. Here's really where you are. But let's be honest. That's truly where you are. So the question then comes, knowing that, because you all know it. You recognize it, but you won't admit it. A lot of that comes down to ego and to various other things. So, what someone much smarter than myself created was called an Eisenhower box. And so every day I do this to lay out the tasks that I have. I have multiple clients that I have multiple deliveries on. This allows me to prioritize exactly what I have to do on a daily basis. Again, it's just called an Eisenhower box. So once we have planned, we've delivered, the military has a debrief, an after-action review. I've already talked about it a little bit. So the point of the debrief is to figure out what went wrong and what went right. Why? So we can get better. How many people have made the same mistake multiple times? I know I have. The intention of the debrief is to ensure continuous learning, continuous improvement, and not make the same mistake twice. It revolves around having a root cause analysis. What specifically happened and why? Developing a lesson learned. How are we actually going to fix it? What changes? What actions do we have to put in place to improve upon it? And then finally, it goes through that changing of the culture. Through the debrief, which is an open communication, and I will openly tell you right now, it's the hardest thing that an organization can do, and I'll tell you why. The excuses I typically get when I ask, why don't we debrief? One is ego. When I start out my debriefs, hey team, we did great, but I could have served you better. I could have performed better. And by the way, here's the specific things that I lacked. And then I make them tell me. Because ultimately, I want to get better as a leader, and I can't do that in a vacuum. But probably the most common one I get is time, right? Well, we don't have time to debrief. And I'm here to tell you that's actually not the case. So 2013, Corselli and Tannenbaum did a meta-analysis of individual and team debriefing. What were the effects on an organization? So when you have an individual debrief, you're focused on yourself, you have a 17% improvement in performance. Now this is a peer-reviewed meta-analysis of 83 different studies. Now I throw this out there because I'm not a salesperson. The highest improvement was 38%. But let's be honest, it's not the average. The average was a structured debrief, meaning we are focused on the team, we have a process, was 20 to 25% improvement on performance on the next round. So how can anybody tell me they don't have time? I've already told you that most projects don't finish on time. If you could finish 20% of your initiatives on task, on time, on budget, are you telling me that you don't have enough time to debrief? And by the way, the average was 17 minutes. 17 minutes to debrief. How do we not have the time not to do it? That's the real question. So, what can we do now? First, communicate your strategy. I was at a major pharmaceutical company last week doing a strategy session with the oncology department. And when I looked at the executive director of the team, and I was like, Miguel, what's it's your company's name, strategy? What? What are you going after next year or in 3 years? His response was just dead silence. He's like, we don't have one. I go, okay, you don't, but your company does. I guarantee you they do. They have failed to communicate it. So how are you making decisions, Miguel? How are you prioritizing to your oncology, your women's cancer, your lung, your hematology departments? If you can't even determine or know what the overarching strategy of the organization is. And his response was pretty eye-opening at that point is, yeah, we'll have to figure that out. So when you prioritize, you have to reprioritize every couple weeks, going after shiny objects because you just don't know. Or if your organization decides to communicate the specific strategy they have, roll that down so you can get to make quarterly impacts on it. Think that's a little bit easier? So I can't stress communicating the strategy of the organization down to your teams enough. The next is trust your people. You hire them. Your predecessor hired them. If they're not in the right role, find the right role for them. Trust your people. And you'll find, not only will they do a better job, but when they don't know something, they'll start coming to you. And then finally, align. Right, we talked about priorities. But ensure everybody in that organization, everybody in your team, everybody in the room knows what the priority is and how you meet it and how you intend it to be. If the organization isn't aligned to the same end state, we're wrong. For those that have done land navigation or flying, you know a 2-degree offset would put you in a different country if you were flying overseas. That's what happens when we're not aligned as an organization. So that is the end. We have time for about 15 minutes of Q&A. If there are any, I can give you some contingency stories. Go ahead, Gary.
Aaron, so you talked about goal setting, alignment, planning. So what happens when you do that? But you set your goals, you have a great plan, you're all aligned. Then there's some kind of outside forces, whether it's you're dealing with a bureaucracy, you find out you don't have the system and processes in place to support your goals, some environmental factor, regulatory factor, and that kind of throws you off course. How do you keep your people engaged and motivated when that happens? Because I know it can be pretty demotivating.
Well, I mean, you guys face regulatory issues? It's a great question. So I think part of our planning process, we identify the threats that are probably going to encompass this. We do it in a very open manner using what's called a Crawford slip. And what it allows for is it allows for everybody to have a voice. It's a silent done with post-it notes. So everybody has that voice, everybody's identifying them. So hopefully they've been identified within the planning process itself. But it does happen quite a bit where something comes up. So what we find is during these weekly meetings, so we look at regulatory and compliance issues. It's never, especially from the government, because they move at the speed of the slug. It takes weeks and months for something to pop up. So you probably know about it in that case. So during our weekly meetings, part of the structure is, what are we facing that we didn't figure out before? And then, hey, do we have to spend an hour and replan this real quick from this portion to the end? But ultimately, here's the reality of the situation. Sometimes we just plan crappy. Sometimes things change so drastically. Sometimes a company is bought, and the whole entire process has to be canned, right? But one of the beauties with this, when there's small changes, whether it's regulatory, a new threat, maybe someone left the organization, there's a new hire that's coming onto the team that has to be trained, or priorities shift. Because we do this on a weekly basis, we allow for these small course corrections. So from that point, when we have something pop up like that, we spend the time not on that call. We then schedule a quick, what we call a rapid replanning session. We bring those individuals who are affected by that very specific task, and we replan that task. Sometimes it becomes a parallel project, and sometimes it totally throws off our timeline. And if that's the case, we bring in the sponsor, the executive sponsor of whatever the initiative is, and we have that conversation with them. And we realign back to them that here are the issues that we have, here's our way ahead, by the way, the date's gonna slip 2 months, and here's why, and here's the plan. So at the end of the day, it does happen. And sometimes we can't control things, right? I can't control a lot of threats in my life that pop up, both from when I was in the military. So now, case in point, 2010, I was basically in the reserves, got called back to active duty to do what's called a JTAC opera. So, like I said, dropping bombs on targets. I was attached to a other government agency entity, embedded with some forces. And we were tasked with landing in this northern area of Afghanistan and do basically a reconnaissance operation, scout out the area. So we planned, and as the helicopter came down, the props hit a tree that we didn't plan for, and we rolled down the hill. One of our Afghanis shot himself. So now we have a dead pilot, an Afghani that's wounded, and we're sitting in the middle of enemy territory. So what do? We plan, because at this point everything's going to hell. So we plan, right on the spot, in 30 seconds, here's what we have to do: get to the hill, get the Afghani. We can't do anything with the pilot because we don't have the equipment to pull him out of a cockpit that's just crashed. So we get up the hill, we replan. We take a reassessment of the area, and we start making phone calls to various groups. And from that, we replan about 4 more times. We ended up getting overrun a little bit by local enemies, but the end state was because we continuously, and we brought everybody into our planning session. I knew who I had to call if I needed something in emergency action. And because of that, we were able to get the pilot out, and no one else got hurt for basically 16 hours going into daybreak. So it's all about having that rapid flexibility, adaptability in your plan, and constantly changing it.
Hi, good morning. So my question's a little bit along the same lines, but it's more around the psychology part of it. So when you have a team and you have to hit the reset button really quickly, change the course of direction, what are some of the tools in your tool belt to getting those folks to follow you, see a new vision very quickly, and do things differently than they did before from a psychology perspective?
Transparency. That is probably the single biggest thing you can give your employees is transparency across the organization. Your employees know that things change on a constant, but as a key leader, it's knowing where that line of information you're going to pass to them. But ultimately, if something is going to affect them, the day job, the initiative, the project, whatever it is, they should always be in the know. If not, rumors flare, people become more disengaged, and the project becomes more off track. Ultimately, what ends up happening is, as soon as you know there's an issue, hey, we might reprioritize, we might have this or this going on, it's, hey, team, here's the issue we're facing. We're going to continue down because we don't know what's going on. As soon as I get information, I will inform you. I go, but if you have questions, comments, my door is open. We can have open discussion now. We can set time aside. It really comes down to ensuring that you have that communication lines open, because the second you shut those down, your employees become blocked. It becomes a blockage and a disengagement. That flow of communication is critical. And being transparent, and transparency will build trust within the organization, because now they're going to feel like, hey, I can come talk to you. Because one, you're going to listen, and two, you're going to give me the ground truth of what's going on. Now, the flip side, I'm going to tell you right now, leadership sucks. It is hard. Because what happens when there is a big change, it's yours. It's not the company's. It's not your boss's. Hey, this is what we're doing. Why? Because I said so. We're doing it because things have changed. This is the decision that's been made. So we are going to move forward. It's not, well, I agree with you, I don't like it. It's, no, this is what we're doing. I'll tell you right now, the best leaders I had, I hated. But I respect it. And I think that's one of the big things that we have is leadership isn't about having friends, it's about taking care of your people. And the only way we can do that is with pure transparency and communication. I have no problem being disliked by my employees as long as I'm respected on the job. And they know that I have their best interests at heart over my own.
Just to follow up on your last comment, leadership is very lonely. How do you remain resilient?
That is a really good question. So resiliency is probably one of the single biggest topics that's upcoming right now, and having that mindset. And yes, leadership is very lonely. I mean, you are on an island basically for the most part. So the only way you can have resilience, it's twofold. One is you have to build, call it grit, call it resiliency, call it whatever you want. You have to build up thick skin. You have to know that you're making the right decision for your people, and they may not see it right now. But they will eventually. It really comes down to accepting rejection. And then as a leadership, you might be alone in this task in your team and all of that, but you're not alone in the organization. You have leaders that are in the same vertical hierarchy as you. And openly, you should be having these weekly conversations with them. One to vent, because let's be honest, if you don't get it out, it bottles up in, and then you just explode. So a big part is creating that network at your own level, maybe even one level up, as long as you have the trust of that leader, so you can get the issues off, get them out of your body to keep your mind clean. There really is no simple way to build resiliency. It is a very long process where you have to accept the situation you're in and stop focusing on the rearview mirror and start focusing on what do I need to impact next. but you have to get used to failure and probably people talking about you, which is ego. So that's really it. It's really just, it's repetitive. It's repetitive in nature. There's a whole chemical reaction in your body, the hypothalamus, when we talk about a lot of that. And what you'll find when you ever read a study on this, which I don't recommend, what you'll find is that understanding that the chemical reaction in your brain, the release of those chemicals, whether it's fear, anger, love, lust, it's identical. So understanding the emotion you have and being able to accept it and be able to regulate those emotions and know that, yes, your people are upset, but they're really not mad at you. They're mad at what's going on. You're just basically the sounding board. But the best way to do it is to vent, to get that off your chest, so to speak. So you need to create that own organization, having leadership lunches, I don't want to say off-sites, but when you have that time to have that discussion with everybody else, because I guarantee you a lot of people feel the exact same way. And when you begin to get that reopened, it no longer becomes an issue.
So on a totally different subject. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I want to talk about SEAL stuff, because every guy in here is like, and most of the ladies too, I'll admit, are just enamored with the whole mystique surrounding SEALs and special ops and forces. So is it anything in the real world like it is on TV, like the communications and the planning and the execution and the weapons and all that stuff?
So, no. Some of it is, yes. There's technical advisors that'll go over some of the tactics, things like that. Obviously, most of the tactics that we use, we would never release publicly. Goes into a movie, someone else sees it, next thing you know, it becomes known to anybody who might be an enemy of the country. Weapons, yeah, for the most part, are fairly safe ones we use. We're military contracts, so it's not like we're that special when it comes to that regard. But, if you look at a lot of the movies that are out there, Active Valor, a bunch of others, even the TV shows, things like that, the reality is when I deployed as a team, I deployed with my unit to one location. And very rarely did we hop from one country to the next to go after one individual. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have teams on standby that are on. We basically, 60 minutes to get to the command, 60 minutes to get to your aircraft and wheels up, which means you have to live in a certain local area around the base. But ultimately, I think it's becoming more accurate than it was historically. But also, we write a lot more books than we used to. So, good, bad, and different. But questions. We can, as long as Jen allows it, I can answer your questions. All right, then we are at time anyway. But I do want to thank everybody first for having me here. Jen, Gary, Mike for the introduction. I truly appreciate everything that Innovatix has done working with me, but I also want to thank the AV team. Jonathan and his team and Eddie have been utterly amazing throughout this whole process for me, and AV is probably the organization group that gets no recognition for what they do. So I will end on this. For those that have served, thank you for your families as well. But openly, I really thank you for paying your tax dollars because I had a lot of fun with it. Thank you.
Thank you again to Eric Tuck.